What week are we in, Jonah? Any idea? Yeah, what week are we in? Yeah. We're in our second week. October 11th. We're in our 49th week in this lesson. All right. We got to help John out. John, are you on K? You on K? Lesson K. You're in lesson K, right? No. Okay. Go to number 1, the blanks that aren't filled in. We'll get you caught up. You got a lesson, Margie? Oh, the boy fell asleep? Could you get Margie a lesson? A K lesson. It's lesson K. Lesson K is Kinship, our Baptist heritage. It's K. Okay. I? All right. Now we covered 9 minutes remaining. We're going to cram in 3 hours worth of study into 9 minutes. So I'm going to help these folks out because we're past this. And we're all, since we've got answers, list 3 ways many of our Baptist forefathers were harshly dealt with. And we can find that on page 2 in our textbook. But go ahead, those of us who answered that 2 months ago. What were some ways?
Drowned.
They were drowned. Whipped. So we can write those in for those of us who haven't copied those into our... On page 78, Trail of Blood. They were burned. Burned. Somebody else. Banished. They were banished. How many we got? Yep. They were branded. They were whipped. How many? Branded, whipped, burned, drowned, banished. That amount covers it. It says, write out the statement made by Cardinal Hosius concerning the Baptist. And that's on page 3. And the statement is, were it not that the Baptists have been grievously tormented and cut off with a knife during the past 1,200 years, they would swarm in greater number than all the reformers. So what did we say the other day? 50 million were slaughtered? 50 million. And then finally, the third one, how many marks or doctrine of New Testament churches does Dr. Carroll enumerate? And we determined how many was that? 11. And then we, from page, what page was that, folks? 5. Well, I'm not so sure about that exactly, but his statement rings true. But as we look at our 9 marks or doctrines or distinctives of the true church, we had gotten down to, well, we can read them, or we can reiterate them. First of all, who's the head or founder of our church? Christ. What is the rule of our faith? What's our rule book? The Bible, plain and simple. All right. What's the name of our... What's the name given to this place we congregate in? Church. What's its polity? Its form of organization? It's congregational. It's not a congregational church. It just means that its congregation, the people within it, determine how it happens. So we at West Salem Baptist Church determines what goes on in this assembly. Dictated by what? The Bible. We don't stray from what the Bible says. Who's the head of the church? Jesus is the head of the church. What are our two ordinances? And the Lord's Supper.
No, I actually changed it to the funky bread.
The funky bread. And then we have, what are our officers here? And who decides who they are? The church, the congregation. We don't have somebody giving us the members. The members. But some denominations send you who they want as your leader. You know, my mom belongs, they sent us a new pastor, you know. That's not the way it's outlined in the book, the good book, the Bible. All right. So what's the purpose or the work of the church? It's the Great Commission, that's right. Go ye therefore into all nations, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son. Is that right? I don't know. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. We got the basic understanding. And then, how do we finance this place? Our financial plan for the church is what? So, shouldn't we be asking for help from the government? No. All right, so that's where we had gotten to last week, right? And we were on to the next, or were we just there? We just got there? Okay, so let's just pick up there real quick. All right, we'll just start right over. 1 Corinthians 9:14, then Julie, 1 Corinthians 16, 1 through 2, and then John, could you look at Luke 6, 3 through 8, or excuse me, Luke 6, verse 38. Go ahead, Isaiah. Luke 6:38. Right after Julie. 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. 1 Corinthians 9:14. Wow.
Okay. Even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel.
And what does that mean?
That they who preach the gospel should do what the gospel is saying.
So you're waiting for me?
Yes, ma'am.
Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come.
So that's implying what? A collection for the saints? For the
For the work of the church.
for the work of the church? Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, John.
Luke 6, what were the verses again?
Just 38.
Just 30, okay.
Yeah, Luke's.
Give, and it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, shall man give into your bosom. same measure that ye meet withal, it shall be measured to you again. So whatever you give, you're gonna get back.
And you're gonna get more, and it's gonna be pressed down, and this church is a testimony to that. Because a lot of us who've been here for a while knows there ain't been a lot of money in this church, but this church is given sacrificially, and the Lord has blessed this church beyond measure, and there's never been a lack of money ever at this church. And there hasn't been a lot of real wealthy people there, and it's always impressed me, and it's humbled me by what the Lord will do when people give sacrificially. And I know it from my own life that you cannot outgive God, and it's very impressive, and it humbles me, and I've never had a problem with it since the get-go. All right. Number 10. And this is one that I remind myself a lot of. Its weapons of warfare are spiritual, not carnal. All right, where are we at? Mrs. Hofeld, could you read 2 Corinthians 10:4? Oh, and this is a long one. I will take this one just because I do not want to burden anyone else with this one. Go ahead anytime, Mrs. Hofeld.
For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God and to the pulling down of strongholds.
So they're not carnal. And it says in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10 and on, it says, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all to stand. Stand therefore, having your loins girt with the truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, and watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints, and for me the utterance may be given unto me, that I may be open-mouthed boldly to make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am ambassador in bonds, and therein I may speak boldly as I ought to speak." That was Paul encouraging us to be ready for battle. Not a physical battle, but a spiritual battle. And I've heard more than one message regarding coming to church and the battle in the car, and it's not your wife, it's not your children, it's a spiritual battle.
Check your eye. I'll slap you.
I know you will. You get mean.
Too far. Down. Too far.
He gets mean.
He just wants to.
He gets mean. So we deal with a spiritual warfare. And I tell you what, he's in a battle, and he's trying to get us any way he can. Bible says he's a roaring lion waiting to see who he can devour. And then finally, our last mark or distinctive is its independence, and that's a separation of church and state. And Margie, would you read Matthew 22:21? '21.
They say unto him, Caesar's. Simon said unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's.
Christ is drawn the illustration of two different things. Things of this world, the governments. If the government wants its taxes, let the government have their taxes, because that's got nothing to do with the church. There shouldn't be nothing between the church. This country was founded with the same biblical principles of a separation between church and state. The Salvation Army, for decades, preached the gospel, did all kinds of things separate from the state. Then they started taking church money, and the state started dictating what they could and couldn't do. It's no longer a church. It's a social program governed by the state. No separation, no church. It's just a state function. They can't do things no longer. They got to. Mark says it's just sad over there now. I mean, they can still talk, but they can't do a lot of the things. It used to be at the Salvation Army, and I know from experience, if you came in and got a meal, you mandatory had to hear the gospel. That was their rules, and you couldn't argue with it until the government started giving them money, and now they can't mandate that. What a shame. What's wrong with hearing the gospel? Nothing. That's what it was set up for, but then they started taking dole for the homeless, and it became a social organization. It'd be better if a guy died of starvation saved than been fed his whole life and never heard the gospel. Might seem harsh to the world, but it's the truth. All right. No, we all have these wonderful sheets. But we're not going to actually look at them for a minute or a couple of weeks. We've established from this book and from what this the author of the ABCs of Christian Growth has established of the marks of what the New Testament church founded by Christ was. And they're basic to our church, and we've known them, Christ is the head of the church. It's called the church, self-governing, separate, all these 11 things were established from the beginning. Matthew 16:8 speaks of Christ speaking to Peter, stating that you are Peter, and on this rock I will establish my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So Christ establishes church there. In Ephesians 3:21, as I slowly turn there, states, It says, unto him be glory in the church by Jesus Christ throughout all the ages, throughout all ages, world without end. So that would imply to me that the church was established with Christ and would be consistent until the end. There would be no interruption. Could I assume that correctly? There won't be a big lapse in time for the church? I could assume that. So from history we know, and from the Bible, Christ is crucified. He is seen by the apostles, and then he's seen by 500, and then and the church just takes off, right? I mean, Peter, Paul, this thing is just blowing up. But right from the start, what else is happening to the church? What else is happening? Error is, and that is one thing that's happening, but persecution. You know, that's funny because I've got both things written out. Error and persecution. Right off, persecution is happening. So let's see, right back in front. Acts 12, 1 through 4. And then Julie, Acts 11, 24 and 25a. And then John, could you read Acts 7:58 through 8:3?
1 through 4, you said?
Through 8:1?
3.
3, okay.
Okay, go ahead, yeah.
Now about that time Herod the king stretched forth his hand to vex certain of the church, and he killed James the brother of John with the sword, and because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread, and when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison, and delivered him before coronation, of soldiers to keep him intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people.
So that there is an account of James, John's brother, getting killed, and then Peter getting in prison. And go ahead, Joel. 24 and 25a, first part of 25.
For he was a good man, and full of the Holy Ghost and of faith, and much people was added unto the Lord. Then departed Barnabas.
I got the wrong reference, or I gave you the wrong reference. I wrote it down wrong. Well, that's too bad. Definitely wrote it wrong. All right, John, go ahead and read Acts.
Okay, this is talking about Stephen here.
Right.
And cast him out of the city, and stoned him, and the witnesses laid down their clothes at a young man's feet, whose name was Saul. And they stoned Stephen, calling upon God and saying, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. And he kneeled down and cried with a loud voice, Lord, lay not this sin to their charge. And when he had said this, he fell asleep. Saul was consenting unto his death, and at that time there was a great persecution against the church, which was in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered abroad throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. And devout men carried Stephen to his burial, and made great lamentation over him. As for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering into every house, and hailing men and women, committed them to prison.
So on the other one, the other account I was going to read, but I got the wrong reference, was the persecution that Paul endured. Beaten, imprisoned. How many times was he whipped? 40 times less one, 7 times, but I got the reference wrong. But right off, right away. And then I would like to read this out of our book, if you want to turn it over there to page 11. And we'll start in verse 2. And, or number 2. It says, following their Savior in rapid succession fell many martyred heroes. Stephen was stoned, Matthew was slain in Ethiopia, Mark dragged through the streets until dead, Luke hanged, Peter and Simeon crucified, Andrew tied to a cross, James beheaded, Philip crucified and stoned, Bartholomew flayed alive, Thomas pierced with lances, James the Lesser thrown from the temple and beaten to death, Jude shot to death with arrows, Matthias stoned to death, and Paul beheaded. More than 100 years had gone by before all this had happened. This hard persecution by Judaism and paganism continued for 2 more centuries, and yet mightily spread the Christian religion. It went all over Rome, Europe, Asia, England, Wales, everywhere else where there was any civilization, greatly multiplied and disciples increased continuously, but some of the churches continued to err. So we got, and this is it. This is the time of the church. These red boxes or red ones are good churches, but still you've got these churches that are erring. And now from our New Testament, there were churches that were erring, and we know that Paul had to go to a church. What church did Paul, or wrote to a church? What church do we know from our Bible that had some problems? The Corinthian church. I mean, that was one that God gave us in His Word to say, hey, they had to straighten some things out. But there was a lot of churches that had problems. Galatians, they had problems. But they weren't under the authority of any other churches. They just allowed people with more wisdom to come in to straighten some things out. If we were having some problems here, we might talk to, let's just say, Brother Lance Ketchum for some advice. Or Brother Scott Jones, hey, we're having some problems dealing with this or whatever. I asked him some questions when we were between pastors. It wasn't like he was in charge of us, but they have wisdom. You ask people with wisdom. So, if Paul was around, I might say, hey, Paul, we got some problems over the church. Could you come help us out? That's not giving your leadership over to somebody else, but it's just wisdom. I ask people for wisdom. But they call those churches, well, they call them right here, irregular churches, because they were doing things that weren't lining up with those things. And eventually, those certain things cause some big problems.
Church of Ephesus, is that in Revelation where Jesus is correcting? Is that the same church as the book?
Yeah, I don't know enough to answer that.
It is, and they were started out good, and then
Yeah, and a lot of churches start out good, you know what I mean? This church, we could be rock solid, and we could go away for 20 years, come back, and the drum set could be here, and who knows?
they didn't go away from their doctrine, they went away from the law.
All right. It could happen to any church, absolutely. All right. Let's see, where are we at? I'm just trying to find, I got my book all marked up and trying to study this, or try to put this together, right? So, the first error, according to this book of the trail of blood. And if you want to read along and where I got these, this is on page 12, in the middle of the page, it says, the great churches had many preachers or elders. Some of these bishops or pastors began to assume authority not given them in the New Testament. They began to claim authority over other smaller churches. There were many elders began to lord over God's heritage. Here was the beginning of an error which has grown and multiplied into many other seriously hurtful errors. Here was the beginning of different orders in the ministries running up finally to what is practiced now by others as well as Catholics. Here began what resulted in an entire change from the original democratic politically government of the early churches. This irregularity began in a small way even before the close of the 2nd century. This was possibly the first serious departure from the New Testament church order. I don't know what churches. I'm just going on the information that I'm reading here. So that was the first thing. They started changing leadership. So they're saying, oh, you know, pastors, I don't know so much about pastors. So then over on page 15, are you kidding me? Okay, I had the wrong number. I didn't do good notes, folks. I got wrong numbers here. All right, actually page 16. So it says on under number 15, it says, under the leadership of Emperor Constantine, there comes a truce, a courtship, and a proposal of marriage. The Roman Empire, through its emperor, seeks a marriage with a Christianity. Give us your spiritual power, and we will give you of our temporal power. To effectively bring about the consummate his unholy union, a council was called in AD 313. A call was made for a coming together of the Christian churches of their representations. Many but not all came. The alliance was consummated. A hierarchy was formed in the organization of their heresies. Christ was dethroned as head of the church, and Emperor Constantine was enthroned, only temporary, however, as the head of the church. Huh? Hired? What did I say? Heresy. Okay, anyway. Hirachi. I said Hirachi. Okay. I'm glad I didn't have to read Veraqua. That's Verokwa. But if I try to read it, it's Veraqua. But anyway, so this little irregularity here comes out here, and Constantine buys himself a church. He makes an agreement saying, hey, I'll give you political clout if you give me some clout in your church. So the church trades spirituality with power in the government. So next thing, they got a head of the church that's head of the government. Well, it certainly isn't what God's plan. So then they did mention temporarily, and if we turn over to page 29, man, I got to take better notes, folks. think it's page 29, because it talks about when Leo came into,
That's number 29.
is it 29? Thank you.
Please.
It is 29, thank you. It's on page 19. Thank you. Thanks for watching out for me. So at a number, it says, it was early in the period of the Dark Ages when real popery had its definite beginnings. This was by Leo II, AD 44 to 461. This, however, was not the first time the title was ever used. So they talked about it. But that was 440 to 461. So, according to the Catholic Church, which technically, you're talking, started somewhere in here. So what, for a few hundred years there was no church? Well, according to the Catholics, but the technically, wasn't a Roman Catholic church until Constantine found it, I mean that's what their spin, I mean, where were the other popes in between then? So, there's so many holes, they got to make a doctrine to fix all the holes in it, where Christ just said a doctrine. And the thing is as I get reading about it, and we're going to go through a lot of this as we get going, but we've got indulgences, purgatory, infant baptism, all these different heresies come with different motivations and different ideals on why they're doing these things. And what's interesting, though they're wrong, you can see well-intentioned people with well-meaning hearts trying to help folks and just getting it wrong. And it's not out of malice. But what it is where we go back to that spiritual warfare. And I've been just really kind of tuned to it for a few weeks because it's just being pointed out to me. The devil is a counterfeit. And he's got himself a counterfeit religion that's been running right alongside a true religion. And it's using the same terminology, Christ, saved, and all these things. And a lot of folks are following right along, headed straight to hell. And the devil loves it because it's setting it up for, the end of the world. And it's for a while it was the true church, the world, and it's just a counterfeit. And it's a spiritual warfare. And the only way to beat the devil is through the Spirit, and it's through prayer and giving him the truth. But anyway, that's all the time we have for tonight. So, but the first thing was just the leadership. And they took Christ off the throne and put a man the head of the church. And then when a man's the head of the church, you can change the rules. And, so anyway, I've been enjoying it as I sit there. And hopefully, like I've told everybody, just read this, because I'd like you to all help me learn more about it as I go along and get those other ideas, because iron sharpeneth iron. So let's stand and have a word of prayer. I just find it interesting, and I'm trying to share what I've been learning, in a day or a day and a half as I put these lessons together. So, all right, I'm going to have Brother Seth Holfeld close us in a word of prayer, if he doesn't mind. And if he does, I'll close. Amen. Thank you all for being here.